For many generations, organized crime has been a sticky aspect of society that just refuses to go away. It has become a part of pop culture, and the activities of several mafias have served as references for several hit TV shows like Amora, The Godfather, Peaky Blinders, The Sopranos. The list goes on. Over the years, many of these mafia have been targeted by law enforcement in an effort to cripple the mafia's hold on society. As a result, many powerful mafia bosses have been arrested, and some even killed in a dispute among fellow mobsters. But the mafia is far from gone. In fact, many of them are still very present in 2023 in several countries across the globe, the most prominent of them being the 5 crime families operating in New York. In this video, we'll be taking a look at these powerful organizations, especially their origins, as well as their current bosses. The Gambino Family boss. Born in Palermo, Sicily in 1947, Domenico Cefalù is the current boss of the Gambino crime family. He went from modman to underboss and then boss. But before we tell you of his journey, let's take a trip down memory lane, back to the roots of the Gambino family. The Gambino crime family is one of the Italian-American crime families that operate in New York City. Founded in the 1900s by Vincent Mangano and named after Carlo Gambino, this crime family was originally a minor player in organized crime, but things changed over the years. Let's go back to 1930, when the Castellamarese War began between Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Both were vying for control over the Italian-American organized crime in New York. Eventually, Masseria was murdered by some of his own gang members who had defected to Maranzano's side. Maranzano declared himself as the capo di tutti capi, which means boss of all bosses. Not long after, Maranzano was assassinated by a squad of contract killers, and Charles Lucky Luciano, who organized both hits, rose to power, appointing Vincent Mangano as head of the D'Aquila Mineo gang, which will eventually become the Mangano crime family, and eventually the Gambino crime family. Despite being a small-time crime family, Carlo Gambino built it to become what was the most powerful crime family in the U.S. This rise to power began in 1957, when Albert Anastasia was assassinated while getting his hair cut, and it is believed that Carlo Gambino took part in the orchestration of the assassination in order to become the leader of the crime family. Anastasia was once the head of the enforcement arm of the underworld, known as Murder Inc. In the past, the Gambino family was headed by different bosses, and each time, the crime family had a different name. Beginning with Vincent Mangano, who took over the family after the Castellamarese War, the crime family was initially known as the Mangano crime family. Vincent was a man who cared more about the future than fighting rivals, unlike Masseria and Maranzano. To that end, he focused on compensating for the losses incurred until the end of the Prohibition era. He moved his family into extortion, union racketeering, and illegal gambling operations, including horse betting, running numbers, and lotteries. Vincent established the City Democratic Club as a front for Murder Inc. led by Albert Anastasia, known as the Lord High Executioner. Despite Vincent and Anastasia working together for 20 years, they were usually in conflict, often coming close to physical combat. Eventually, Vincent Mangano disappeared without a trace, while his brother Philip was found dead, and Anastasia took over. It is believed that Anastasia had both of them murdered. Anastasia was known as a vicious murderer and was feared by the New York crime families. Soon enough, Anastasia's cup was full and running over thanks to his brutality that attracted the wrath of the public. This gave rise to the plot of his downfall. On October 25, 1957, several masked gunmen murdered Anastasia in the barbershop at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. After Anastasia's assassination, Carlo Gambino became the boss of what is now known as the Gambino family. The structure of the Gambino crime family is similar to the other Italian-American mafias, with the commander-in-chief being the boss. Whoever the boss was, they were responsible for overseeing the entire group and its activities. The second in command, the underboss, is expected to take over the family if the boss were to go to prison or die, an occupational hazard of being in the mafia. The capos are in charge of the crews of soldiers and ensure that the crews of lower-ranked members follow the orders from the boss. The soldiers are the ones who do most of the work and need to be sworn into the system. These so-called soldiers are divided into earners and enforcers. The earners bring in the cash for the organization, and the enforcers utilize violence when necessary, as instructed by the boss. Soldiers are generally known as made men, a title of sorts, which grants them protection, and thus they can't be killed unless the boss approves of it. The lowest members of the family are its associates. These members commit criminal acts for the organization, but they aren't made. They operate distant from the cartel, making them hard for law enforcement to pin down. A perk, maybe. Currently, Domenico Cefalù is the boss of the Gambino family. He was inducted in 1990 as a mod man, and was a member of the Sicilian Zip crew, headed by Captain Pasquale Conti. In 1992, Cefalu refused to testify in an investigation of Conte and was jailed for 18 months for civil contempt. The next year, he was summoned to testify in Conte's case, but he refused yet again. Cefalu was released from jail in 1994, but was convicted of criminal contempt in 1996 and was sentenced to 33 months in prison. He became the underboss in 2005 and oversaw the Sicilian faction of the Gambino family. On February 7, 2008, Cefalu was indicted on multiple charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and extortion as part of the Operation Old Bridge investigation of the Gambino family. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and was released on November 3, 2009. He became the official boss of the Gambino family in July 2011, and he ran the family with a series of acting bosses, one of which is Lorenzo Menino. In 2004, Lorenzo was released from prison after serving a 15-year sentence for drug trafficking and a murder conspiracy. He had been living in the Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn since his release from prison and had replaced Frankie Boy Cali, who was killed outside his home in March 2019. Menino has been part of the Gambino family's administration for several years and is even a powerful figure in the family's Sicilian faction. In the past, mafia bosses were known for their expensive and lavish lifestyle, but things are different now. The celebrity mafia boss lifestyle is now mostly a thing of the past, as today's mafia bosses have learned that attention is not good for business. Took them long enough to figure it out. The Genovese family boss. Throughout the years, the Genovese family has had many leaders, and currently the man most likely to be the boss of the Genovese family is Liborio Bellomo. But first, some history. Founded by Charles Lucky Luciano, it was initially known as the Luciano family from 1931 to 1957 and renamed after boss Vito Genovese in 1957. The Genovese family is the oldest and largest of the 5 families that dominate the organized crime activities in New York and New Jersey, and is currently being run by a number of capos, headed by one Liborio Bellomo. The Genovese family's origins can be traced back to the Morello gang, the first mafia family in New York City, and founded by the infamous Giuseppe Morello. During the Castellamarese era, Joe Masseria expanded his influence, increased extortion, loan sharking, and illegal gambling rackets. In order to protect and manage these rackets, he recruited many mobsters who went on to become heavyweights in the mafia world, including Charles Lucky Luciano and Vito Genovese. Masseria had a rivalry with Salvatore Maranzano, and the feud between the both of them eventually led to the bloody Castellamarese War. At one point during the war, Luciano switched allegiance and made a secret deal with Maranzano, one which would see Luciano become Maranzano's second in command, and in return, Luciano helped assassinate Masseria. On April 15, 1931, Masseria was in a restaurant playing cards with Luciano, who later excused himself to go to the bathroom. 4 gunmen, including Genovese, walked in and fatally shot Masseria. Luciano was happy being Maranzano's lieutenant, but was also biding his time before removing Maranzano as well. Realizing Luciano was a threat, Maranzano marked him for death. Luciano was warned, however, and he took preemptive action. He sent 4 Jewish gangsters to Maranzano's office and they assassinated him. Luciano was eventually imprisoned, but continued running his organization from within prison walls, relaying his orders through Genovese. Fearing an impending indictment for murder, Genovese fled to Naples, and Luciano appointed Costello as the new acting boss. Genovese eventually returned and sought to take control of the family. To this end, he plotted against Costello. After a failed assassination attempt on, Costello feared for his life and surrendered control of the family to Genovese. Since Vito Genovese, several people have emerged as head of the Genovese family, but one man in particular sticks out among others. For years, the family was run by Vincent the Chin Gigante, called the Odd Father, who pretended to be insane by walking unshaven through New York's Greenwich Village, wearing a tattered bathrobe and muttering to himself. He went to such hilarious lengths to avoid prosecution. Gigante built a vast network of bookmaking and loan sharking rings, and from extortion of garbage, shipping, trucking, and construction companies seeking labor peace or contracts from carpenters, teamsters, and laborers' unions, including those at the Javits Center, as well as protection payoffs from merchants at the Fulton Fish Market. After the imprisonment of John Gotti in 1992, Gigante came to be known as the figurehead capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses, despite the position being abolished in 1931 with the murder of Salvatore Maranzano. The FBI found it incredibly difficult to pin him down thanks to Gigante's reclusive nature. It was almost impossible to catch him. During conversations, Genovese members were not allowed to say his name. They would point to their chins or make the letter C with their fingers whenever they meant to refer to him. When he was finally indicted, he attended his arraignment in his pajamas and bathrobe, and due to his defense stating that he was mentally and physically impaired, legal battles ensued for 7 years over his competence to stand trial. trial. His lawyers and family kept pushing the insanity defense until August 1996, when Judge Eugene Nickerson ruled that Gigante was mentally competent to stand trial. On July 25, 2003, Andrew Gigante was sentenced to 2 years in prison and fined $2.5 million for racketeering and extortion. He died on December 19, 2005. The Genovese family has earned a reputation for strategically placing top capos in leadership positions within their organization. Presently, the most influential capos within the family are Bellomo, Muscarella, Cirillo, and Dentico. Among them, the capo most likely to ascend to the role of a boss is Liborio Bellomo. However, Bellomo's journey to prominence has not been without controversy. Bellomo has faced serious legal troubles in the past, including indictments on charges related to the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO. These charges encompassed various criminal activities such as murder, extortion, and labor racketeering. Specifically, the murders of mobsters Ralph DeSimone and Antonio Di Lorenzo were attributed to Bellomo. The Genovese family suspected that both individuals were government informants, leading to their untimely deaths. Interestingly, Bellomo underwent 2 polygraph tests, during which he vehemently denied any involvement in the murders. In a desperate attempt to verify his truthfulness, the FBI even resorted to shaving his head to check for the presence of lithium, a substance believed to potentially deceive polygraph machines. However, despite these efforts, the claim that lithium or similar substances could fool a polygraph machine has been proven false. Ultimately, the murder charges against Bellomo for the deaths of DeSimone and Di Lorenzo were dropped by prosecutors. Instead, he was given the opportunity to plead guilty to the charge of extortion. Bellomo accepted the plea deal and received a sentence of 10 years in prison. In 2006, Bellomo faced another serious charge related to the murder of Ralph Coppola, who served as the acting captain within Bellomo's crew and was also a close friend. Coppola disappeared before he could be sentenced on fraud charges and was never found. A former lawyer for the Genovese family, Peter Peluso, admitted to acting as a messenger for Bellomo, who was in prison at the time. Peluso confessed that he delivered a message ordering the murder of Coppola. Consequently, Peluso pleaded guilty to his involvement in the murder. However, direct evidence linking the murder to Bellomo was elusive, as authorities were unable to definitively establish whether Peluso had indeed met with Bellomo. Faced with no evidence to pin the murder on Bellomo, the government offered him another plea bargain, which he accepted. Bellomo accepted and received 1 additional year in prison instead of 4, as his daughter Sabrina gave a tearful plea to Judge Louis A. Kaplan alongside her 3 brothers. During the time he was in prison, Bellomo missed out on his daughter's high school, college, and law school graduations. Bellomo's release from prison occurred on December 1, 2008, and he is believed to retain his position as the boss of the formidable Genovese family. Despite the legal challenges he has faced, Bellomo's influence within the family remains intact, and his ability to navigate the intricate dynamics of organized crime has solidified his standing as a significant figure within the Genovese hierarchy. The Bonanno family boss. Initially known as the Maranzano crime family, the Bonanno family is among the crime families that make up the phenomenon known as the American Mafia. It was founded by Salvatore Maranzano, and after his assassination, Lucky Luciano oversaw the crime families in New York, and he awarded most of Maranzano's operations to Joseph Bonanno. However, things didn't just start like that. It all began in 1930 when the Castellamarese War kicked off between Joe Masseria and the members of the Castellamarese. What started as a small feud over Masseria's stolen bootleg liquor quickly escalated into a full-blown war. At the time, the Castellamareses were led by Niccolo Colashiro, who tried to work with Masseria. Shiro was replaced, and coming up after him was Salvatore Maranzano, his goal being to take control of New York's underworld. Unlike the Masseria clan, the Castellamarese faction was more unified. Maranzano won the war, and he established 5 Cosa Nostra families: the Luciano family under Lucky Luciano, the Mangano family under Vincent Mangano, the Gagliano family under Tommy Gagliano, the Profacci family under Joseph Profacci, and the Maranzano crime family under himself, and created the post of Capo di Tutti Capi, or Boss of Bosses, a post he kept for himself. Fast forward to after the war, when Lucky Luciano had Maranzano murdered. Luciano was the one who replaced the title of Boss of all Bosses with the Commission in order to regulate the Mafia's national affairs and mediate disputes between families. After that, he placed Joseph Bonanno in charge of the Maranzano family, soon to become the Bonanno family, At just 26 years old, Bonanno was the youngest mafia leader in the nation. During this era, the Bonanno family was largely involved in illegal gambling, loan sharking, and narcotics, and with the support of the Buffalo crime family, Bonanno expanded his influence into Canada. The Bonanno family was considered to be the most closely knit of the five families because Joseph Bonanno restricted membership to Castellamarese Sicilians. He upheld the old world mafia traditions of honor, tradition, respect, and dignity, values which Maranzano himself once upheld. Bonanno strongly believed that relations and a strict Sicilian upbringing were the only way to uphold the traditional values of the mafia. With time, Joseph Bonanno became a powerful figure in the commission, thanks to his close relationship with fellow boss Joe Profaci. They strengthened their bond when Joseph's son, Salvatore Bonanno, married Profaci's niece Rosalie in 1956. Profaci died in 1962, and Bonanno now had to face the threats of other family bosses, not to mention the rising discontent within his own family owing to the amount of time he was spending in his second home. Bonanno made plans to assassinate several of his rivals on the commission. To that end, he sought and got the support of Profaci's successor, Joseph Magliocco, who was bitter from being denied a seat on the commission. Magliocco was entrusted with the task of killing some of Bonanno's rivals, and he gave the contract to one of his top hitmen, Joseph Colombo. Off topic, it is a remarkable coincidence that the key players here are all named Joseph. But anyway, Colombo was an opportunistic traitor, and he revealed the assassination plot to its targets. Realizing that Magliocco couldn't possibly have planned it himself, they quickly deduced that Bonanno was the true mastermind. The commission summoned both Bonanno and Magliocco to explain themselves, but a terrified Bonanno fled to Montreal and left Magliocco behind to face the music. So much for honor and dignity, right? After all, those things mean jack squat when one's life is on the line. Magliocco confessed to his role in the plot, but his life was spared by the commission, forcing him to retire and pay a $50,000 fine. For turning on his boss, Colombo was awarded the Profaci family, which later became the Colombo family. But we'll get to that in a minute. Following Bonanno's disappearing act, there was a feud within the Bonanno crime family which lasted for 2 years. Funny enough, this war was referred to as the Bonanno War, and I think we all know why. On May 17, 1966, Bonanno resurfaced, and 2 years later, he ended the family warfare by agreeing to retire as boss. Since Joseph Bonanno, there have been a number of other leaders that took the position of boss of the family. The Bonanno family sustained quite a few hits and lost its influence, but the dawn of a new millennium saw the Bonanno family not only regain their seat on the commission, but also become the most powerful family in New York. The current boss of the Bonanno family is a man named Michael "The Nose" Mancuso. He assumed this position while in prison, and on March 12, 2019, he was released from prison. In his earlier years, Mancuso was affiliated with the East Harlem Purple Gang. In August 1984, Mancuso fatally shot his wife Evelina and left her body on a bench in front of Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx. He pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of his wife and was slammed with a 10-year prison sentence. While in prison, he was promoted to acting underboss and eventually became the acting boss in 2004. On February 16, 2006, Mancuso was arrested in Las Vegas for ordering the murder of associate Randolph Pizzolo on November 30, 2004. Mancuso arranged Pizzolo's murder in accordance with the orders he received from the imprisoned acting boss at the time, Vincent Bassiano. This hit was carried out by soldier Anthony Ace Aiello, and on August 6, 2008, Aiello and Mancuso pleaded guilty to murdering Pizzolo. Aiello received a sentence of 30 years, but Mancuso, on the other hand, was given a lighter sentence and was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the murder. It was while serving this sentence that Mancuso was appointed boss of the Bonanno family, and he is controlling the family through his Bronx associates and underboss Thomas DiFiore. Despite being rearrested in 2022 for violating the terms of his supervised release, he still remains the boss of the Bonanno family. The Colombo family boss. The Colombo family, initially named the Profaci family, traces its roots back to the aftermath of the Castellamarese War. After Luciano had Maranzano killed and established the commission, Profaci and Magliocco were respectively confirmed as boss and underboss of the Profaci family. Throughout the years, the Profaci family was torn by war, the first of which occurred in 1959 between Profaci and the Gallo brothers. The war lasted until Joe Profaci died of cancer in 1962, leaving his underboss Magliocco as the new boss. Magliocco Magliocco continued the war in Profaci's stead, but things went downhill in 1963. Joseph Bonanno of the Bonanno family had plotted to kill several members of the commission, and he left the task to his friend Magliocco, who was bitter from being denied a seat on the council. Magliocco assigned the task to one of his top hitmen, Joseph Colombo. Yes, it's that guy from before. Joseph Colombo revealed the assassination plot to its intended targets, and the other bosses summoned Bonanno and Magliocco for an explanation. Bonanno, however, was too scared to face the commission, and he abandoned Magliocco, leaving him to deal with the consequences by himself. Magliocco confessed his role in the plot, and his life was spared. Still, he was forced to retire as boss and had to pay a $50,000 fine. For turning on his boss, Joseph Colombo was awarded the title of the boss of the Profaci family, now called the Colombo family. At the time of his appointment, the 41-year-old Colombo was the youngest boss in New York and the first New York Mafia boss to have been born and raised in the United States of America. Colombo anticipated that he was going to have a long reign, and if he outlived his fellow New York bosses, he could become not only the most powerful boss in New York, but the entire country as well. To that end, Colombo set out to reshuffle the family ranks, placing older and more ambitious gangsters in higher positions. In so doing, he also stabilized the family that had been enduring a tumultuous period of conflict. During his time, Colombo's leadership was never challenged. In April 1970, Colombo founded the Italian-American Civil Rights League in an effort to fight against discrimination against Italian Americans. Despite the disapproval of many mobsters fearing the unwanted attention this would attract, Colombo held the first league rally on June 29, 1970. Before the second rally, the other New York bosses ordered their men not to go anywhere near the rally and to abstain from supporting Colombo's cause. In 1971, Joe Gallo was freed from prison, but he insisted that the peace treaty between the Profaci faction, otherwise the Colombo family, and the Gallo brothers did not apply to him as he was in prison during the negotiations. In an attempt to reconcile with Gallo, Colombo invited him to a meeting and offered him $1,000, which Gallo promptly rejected, demanding $100,000 to stop the conflict. Colombo rejected the offer, and thus the Second Colombo War began. Colombo issued a new order, an order to kill Gallo. During the Second League rally, a man named Jerome A. Johnson walked up to Colombo just as he was about to speak and shot him 3 times in the back of the head, after which Colombo's bodyguards shot the assailant to death. Miraculously, Colombo survived the attack, but was paralyzed for the last 7 years of his life. Colombo died of natural causes on May 22, 1978. Though the police concluded that Joe Gallo was not responsible for the shooting, many in the Colombo family were all but certain that he was. After another long war, Persico, a prominent capo in prison and the leader of a powerful faction within the family, became the boss of the Colombo family by the end of 1973. Because of his imprisonment at the time of his appointment, Persico made his brother Alphonse the acting boss. Eventually, Alphonse himself was arrested and Persico named Victor Orena the temporary acting boss. Although Orena was merely a placeholder, he was empowered to induct new members and order murders on his own authority. Such power was hardly ever granted to an acting boss. In 1991, Orena sought to take over the family, believing Persico was out of touch. He went as far as to petition the Mafia Commission to recognize him as boss, but the commission, seeking to prevent another conflict, denied his petition. Persico was alerted about Orena's plans and he ordered a hit on Orena. However, Orena was able to escape the gunmen sent to murder him. This led to the beginning of the Third Colombo War. In this conflict, 12 people, including 3 innocent bystanders, were killed, with 18 associates disappearing, never to be seen again. On March 7, 2019, Colombo family boss Carmine Persico died in prison. His cousin Andrew Mush Russo became the official boss of the Colombo family, but even he succumbed to the laws of nature and died on April 18, 2022. Today, no one knows who the boss of the family is, or if it even has a boss. But seeing as the Colombo family is still very much active today, someone has to be pulling the strings. The Lucchese family boss. When Maranzano was busy appointing bosses of the 5 families, he awarded a man called Gagliano the old Reina organization, with Lucchese as his underboss. During the 1930s and 1940s, Gagliano and Lucchese led their family into profitable areas of the trucking and clothing industries. Gagliano was more of a quiet man who avoided the spotlight as much as he could and preferred to pass his orders to the family through Lucchese. Lucchese, on the other hand, was the public face of the family. Thanks to Gagliano's quiet quiet life. Not much is known about what became of him. Whether he died or retired is up for debate, but after Gagliano, Lucchese became the boss of the family. Lucchese continued Gagliano's policies and made what has now become the Lucchese family one of the most profitable families in New York. Lucchese's era was indeed a glorious one for the family. He built close relations with many powerful New York politicians, including mayors William O'Dwyer and Vincent Impellitteri, and members of the judiciary, who aided the family on numerous occasions. Now that he was the boss, he wasn't the public figure he once was. Instead, he kept a low profile and made sure that his men were well taken care of, a necessary thing to do if he wanted to inspire confidence and loyalty. Lucchese was instrumental in Vito Genovese's and Carlo Gambino's rise to power in their respective families. Over time, Lucchese and Gambino began plotting to eliminate Genovese, their former ally, and with some assistance from other mobsters, Genovese was arrested on drug charges. With Genovese out of the way, Lucchese and Gambino assumed full control of the Mafia Commission. Lucchese was part of the council that stripped Bonanno of his role as boss after Joseph Bonanno plotted to assassinate members of the commission. Lucchese lived a quiet life until he died of a brain tumor on July 13, 1967, without ever having spent a day in jail in 44 years. Lucchese had made his family very powerful. With a stronghold in East Harlem and the Bronx and consisting of about 200 made members, the Lucchese family was among the strongest in the country. However, during the late 1980s, the Lucchese family saw its dark ages. Their vicious boss Vittorio Vic Amuso and his fierce underboss Anthony Gaspipe Casso instituted one of the most violent reigns in American mafia history. Historically, after being refused 50% of the earnings generated by the Lucchese crew in New Jersey, called the Jersey Crew, Amuso and Casso ordered the entire Jersey crew to be killed. That order went on to become the infamous Whack Jersey Order. The Jersey crew were summoned to a meeting in Brooklyn, but they knew something was up, and they all went into hiding. Later on, both Amuso and Casso were implicated in a case involving the fitting of thousands of windows in New York at inflated prices, and the pair vanished into thin air. They ruled the family in the background from afar and ordered the execution of anyone they thought was a problem, typically perceiving them to be informants. These acts of tyranny were starting to piss off other members of the family. Ironically, their failed attempts to eliminate these so-called informants eventually turned the targets into actual informants. One particularly notable event was when Amuso attempted to kill the then-acting boss, Alphonse Darco. Darco cleverly escaped his assassin and turned himself over to the police and eventually became an informant, making him the first boss of a New York crime family, whether acting or otherwise, to become an informant. Many years have passed and the Lucchese family is still very much active. Their boss today is Vittorio Vic Amuso. Yes, you heard right. That man's still alive and he's running the Lucchese family from prison. So what's his story? How did he become the boss in the first place? Well, many years ago, Amuso was an enforcer for the Profaci crime family mobster Joseph Gallo. During the war between the Gallo brothers and Giuseppe Joe Profaci, Amuso allegedly killed several members of the Profaci faction, but sometime in the early 1960s, he, along with Joey Gallo and a dozen others, for extortion charges. After Gallo's murder in 1972, Amuso joined the Lucchese family as an associate in the 19th Hole crew. The capo of the crew at the time was Christopher Christy Tick Fernari, and Amuso was one of his top proteges. Anthony Corallo was the boss of the Lucchese family during this time. On December 21, 1972, Amuso was arrested by police outside the house on Morgan Avenue. It was a front for the Bronx Connection kickback scheme, selling prison paroles for as high as $20,000 to prison inmates. Later on, in 1977, Amuso climbed the ranks and became a made man in the Lucchese family. However, that same year, he was arrested for his involvement in a drug trafficking ring, smuggling heroin from Bangkok, Thailand. Amuso and his cooperator Casso were sent to prison. In 1980, Fernari was promoted to consigliere, with Amuso succeeding him as capo. On February 15, 1985, Corallo, Fernari, along with the top major heads of the five families, were indicted, and Lucchese family boss Corallo made his protege Anthony Buddy Luongo the acting boss. However, Luongo disappeared, presumably murdered by Amuso and Casso in an attempt to eliminate Amuso's last major opponent. In 1986, Corallo was aware that his time avoiding the law was running out. He and Fernari were headed for convictions that would land them in prison for life. In order to avoid an internal war and have a peaceful transition of power, Corallo summoned Amuso and Casso to a meeting in Fernari's house to choose the next boss. Ultimately, it was decided that Amuso should be the boss, and he was named acting boss later that year. On January 13, 1987, Corallo was sentenced to life imprisonment and Amuso became the new official boss. Despite being sentenced to life in prison in 1992, Amuso has continued to rule the Lucchese family as boss. If you enjoyed this video, click on the card on your screen screen for more content like this. See you next time.